Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, tonight, tomorrow, today, wherever you are in the world. This is Grant Cameron, and I have an interesting discussion we want to have today. I have two guests with me, and I'll let them sort of give their backgrounds. I've been into consciousness since February 26, 2012. Before 2012, February 26th, I couldn't spell the word consciousness, and I couldn't care less. But I'm joined by two guests today, Bob Davis and Dave Beatty, and I'll let them give the background of who they are and why they're into consciousness. And then we'll get into a discussion I think is going to be fairly interesting about the importance of consciousness in terms of UFOs and in terms of reality, which I think is where I really want to go with it, in terms of how does the world actually work. So go ahead first, Bob, and talk about your background in consciousness and UFOs and how you got here and what you'd like to get out of today's discussion.
Well, for the first six or so decades of my life, I was a left brain research scientist, PhD type, articles, grants, and then I had two armed jobs in Sedona, Arizona. So I wrote the book UFO Phenomenon, Should I Believe, which I should have modified greatly since the 7 years since I wrote it, from what I've learned, and it's a continuing process. So nevertheless, it was like an intro 101 text. Then I had a shared death experience. I knew my friend had died. I knew it in a dream, lucid dream. I then wrote the book, Life After Death, Analysis of the Evidence. Then about 5 years ago, I had call it whatever you want. I hate to use the term Kundalini, mystical, spiritual, whatever, knock my socks off. Yeah. That led me to whatever, unseen forces, which is really the issue at hand here. And what is it? The documentary is based on unseen forces. There is something going on, and we'll get to that, obviously. That led me to write Unseen Forces, the Integration of Science, Reality, and You. So a few people read it. You don't wake up people that way. You send a copy to the first person, synchronistically, happens to be Dave Beatty. I didn't know who Dave Beatty was. I didn't know he was an Emmy Award winner, producer, director, broadcast journal, you name it, he's it. More than qualified professional, has over 6 million views of his Nimitz documentary, Come On, Let's Have Lunch. Long story short, okay? Hi, I'm Dave Beatty. Hi, I'm Bob Davis. To me, it meant nothing. You ever see the documentary? Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you very much for what you did. You woke people up. You're Grant Cameron type in a different way, but you work to the same thing. You wake people up, and that's a challenge here. That's a goal too at this level of our evolving humanity. So, long story short, here we are. Here we are talking about a documentary, talking about consciousness, something that you understand and resonate more with you than just about any bit in the field. And I respect all your work, Grant. You know that. Let me get to the heart of the matter. As a co-producer, as awkward as it is, we need support. And I'll say it again. If you resonate with consciousness and the paranormal and the complexity of reality, that's where we're coming from. That we have the experts that illustrate that the documentary and the experiencers to help further increase the awareness that you gentlemen have provided. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe I can add, I don't know if you mentioned, but you've got a neuroscience background. You're not just like a scientist. So it's like I always make the joke now, if you're a chemistry hammer, everything looks like a chemistry nail. And if you're a physics hammer, everything looks like a physics nail. But you've actually got a background in consciousness, in left brain sort of evaluation of consciousness, but you're not a guy who's coming off the street when it comes to this kind of stuff, correct?
And I'm not the average person walking down the street. That's good and bad, believe me. It depends how you look at it, but it's left brain, right brain struggling. So I'm not only torn apart emotionally in respects to a spiritual emergency, which we all have in varying degrees after we interact with the phenomena and this intention, this information, which we all receive in different words, consciousness, as you will. But it leaves us with that spiritual emergency, but then the question, why me, and all the thousands of other questions that emerge from it. So it's left brain, right brain struggle. And you need to talk about it. And that's part of the help process.
Dave, go ahead.
Well, as Bob introduce, it's kind of synchronistic in that I didn't know who Bob Davis was until about 6 months ago or so, when out of the blue he gives me a telephone call and he starts talking sort of my language. He's talking UFOs, he's talking about a bunch of people that we know in common. I've known Grant for a long time as well in the UFO field, and it was sort of interesting. So I just assumed that Bob was somebody that I had interacted with on social media. I run like several Facebook groups over the years that deal with the ATIP program and UFOs in general. And, even though they had been private, I assumed that perhaps Bob Davis knew about some of the work that I was doing. In fact, during that first telephone call, he revealed that no, he was just looking for a video guy that might be able to help him do a documentary film on some of the work. He had an interest in sort of moving out of just the book author arena and perhaps exploring how this content could be turned into a film. So during that first phone call, it was sort of interesting, and we talked a little bit about how a film is made, the structural part of it, the business part of it, how you can actually go from a conception to actually having a final product. And in that first conversation, I said, I think I said this before I knew about his book. Again, I can't tell you for sure, but I go, Bob, there's a famous quote that is, if you really have a pure heart and intention in this stuff, unseen forces will come to your aid, and this stuff will happen. Doors will open if you follow through. And he's like, let me send you my book. And so a week later, I get this book and I'm staring at it when I open the package, and the cover of the book is Unseen Forces. And it just gave me that, chill that, wait a second, that was like a conversation that we had that, took place, and I didn't know about his book. And fast forward to today where, we've been pursuing this topic together, and it's been a learning experience for me. I explained to Bob, going back before my filmmaking career, back to my adolescence, how I sort of first got interested in human consciousness, the human soul, and where we're from, where we go to. And ironically, I grew up in this small town in upstate New York, where probably one of the most interesting couples began writing books on psychic phenomena channeled through a disincarnate entity they called Seth. He called himself Seth, and Seth even authored his own books channeled through the medium Jane Roberts and her husband Robert Butts. So I lived about a mile away from this couple in this small town called Elmira, New York. And I grew up there, and as an adolescent, I read all the books. Unfortunately, I just missed the bus by a few years because I was kind of like 14 when that group was taking place, and they had their meetings going on a weekly basis, monthly basis at her house there. So I had this keen kind of awareness of, what life really could be about, what we're about, why we're here, and so on. And that was kind of in the background. And, I did pursue a film and television career, and then fast forward to this discussion with Bob, and it kind of rekindled that interest in consciousness and what it really means.
Now, you did a sort of a famous documentary moving the UFO thing, and I've been in a long time, and I think it's key what you're talking about, that you can actually shift this, because you were doing this consciousness thing now. You're going to try to get it out to people. I remember I had an experience with Steve Bassett at the X conference many years ago, where he said, he had the panel and we were all up at the top, and he said, well, when do you think disclosure is going to take place? And people said, oh, 6 months. And someone says, a year. There's no way I believe it would ever happen. I said, 2042. And Steve was actually very upset. It's like, how could you say this in front of all these people? And, and I never thought it would happen, but I know with your documentary and with what happened with the whole ATIP and the New York Times thing, people have to realize that this thing can turn on a dime, and that you figure like, it's like hopeless or whatever. But maybe you can talk a little bit to that about how do we get this how do we sell this to people? How do we get this idea out in terms of shifting people's ideas? Because you know what it's like. I always make the joke that, you know, Stanton Friedman, 61 years, I went through his files, and he had all these debates with famous skeptics. And he'd say, you know, I was at Oxford University and 78% of the audience believed I won the debate. But in terms of, did he ever convince the other guy of anything? He didn't convince any of the people he was arguing with, because they had this sort of left brain where they had their idea set, and you can't move it. So can you talk a little bit about your impression about how do we move this, how the power of film and the power of say Hollywood to shift people's attention?
Well, Stanton Friedman has something to do with today, of course, as well as both of you gentlemen did in your own respective ways. And thank you again. And but Stanton had involvement from above, I think too. Look, it's about an external energy. We call it consciousness, defined in different ways, of course, different disciplines. It's information exchange. You got it with your downloads. I received it in different way. Whatever it is, it's a transpersonal event. We see symptoms of it. What the symptoms are of more awareness, expanded consciousness, this unified interaction, a transpersonal event that makes our morning coffee taste different, as I say. The point is, you can't dismiss it. Everything changes in terms of philosophical and personal values. Science tries to address it. Newtonian physics, we know, doesn't touch it really. Consciousness kind of gets at it in the realm of quantum physics. So you talk about it, we will talk about it with some leading scientists who look at some aspects of quantum physics, like Dean Radin, Tom Campbell, with his VR simulation model. And you tie it in with the experiencer, Eben Alexander, #1 bestseller, Proof of Heaven, Jeff Long, founder of Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. The list goes on and on. Even Jeff Nolan, we spoke to him the other day, telling us about the caudate putamen, the antenna, the physiologic connection to what is speculative, but quantum physics. Again, it kind of aligns with that more so than, you know, Einstein's unified field theory. The documentary addresses it, gets at that. We need to address the fact that reality, as Dave mentioned, is just so vastly complex, and people are interacting apparently with a non-3D interaction, where that interaction is in the form of information, largely positive over time. Of course, it's more than anxiety producing, emergency altering, and, you know, requiring medical attention in many ways because it's so anxiety provoking. The point is, the complexity of it is such that a multidisciplinary action must take place, including the sociologists, the psychologists, the physicists, on and on. The pilots, astronauts, you name it. And we don't have it. It's very fragmented. We see good organizations in the public domain, the UAPX, and there are others, and I'm sorry to leave them out, but a few, and that's the problem. And they're nonprofit. So what does disclosure mean, Grant? Dave, what does disclosure mean? What does consciousness mean? I don't know what disclosure means. It could mean anything. What I think is going on, you talk about a struggle, I think there's another intelligence interaction with us, one or a million, in varying ways. The message, I don't know. All I know is that it seems to elevate people, spiritual connection, interconnectedness, no fear of death. We understand, we hear about the positive aspects, the more your main character they adopt. From the long-term interaction, of course, there's negative experiences, horrific experiences. But I don't mean to paint a rosy picture here. Long-term adaptation, people struggle with this. And these are the voices we have to hear. The Hildebrand Amendment, cool. Big step in the right direction. Much more to the story. And they know it. They know there's another intelligence. So what are they going to do? They're happy that Gillibrand's doing her thing. It'll go sit there, do its thing, evolve. A little report comes out here where they're sharing this, that, we didn't know what that was. And they want the public to be quiet. Because the public is woken up, it's a good thing, increases awareness, very positive. But how much truth are we going to get that non-human entities are downloading information to us? You think that they know it? But I don't know who knows it, but they know it. And people, we don't know the names. Am I right?
Sure.
They got announced that on CNN, New York Times, op-ed, and that's the fact. So what do you mean by disclosure? It's a matter of opinion and your belief about the phenomena.
Yeah, they did know. I mean, I always quote, that was part of my download, was the 1950 document, the Canadian top secret memo, where the Canadians were being told by American officials what was going on. And they said, flying saucers exist, most highly classified subject in the United States. And then this thing at the very end where they said, other things must be associated with the phenomena such as mental phenomena. That was September of 1950. I mean, that was like right when it started. They knew somebody on the inside, or we talked to Dr. Eric Walker at Penn State University, 1991, and that's when he cut us off and he said, "Let me ask you a question. What do you know about the seventh sense?" And the guy had no answer. And he said, "Look, let me tell you, unless you understand about what it is and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. Very few people understand." That's 1991. I didn't know until my download in 2012. Oh, that's what Walker was talking about. I had no idea what he was talking about. And it was this idea of this important consciousness connection that they probably already known. So I think the Gillibrand Amendment moves us farther where you and I can bring it up without people. We can bring up consciousness and say, let's talk about this. Let's add this piece to the story. And eventually they're going to have to deal with it, because I think some people at the top actually know that there is this very key thing, that it may all be consciousness. The UFO thing may just be something that they've thrown to us to talk to us in whatever mentality we're in, and that it may have appeared as something else in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here real quick and say, I'm not sure what disclosure is also, and will the U.S. government and the DoD through these, task force and offices that are being set up, and perhaps most of this information will be on the classified side, and the subcommittees that are looking at this material that's often being generated by DoD versus civilian sources. Will the information ever come out to the public? There's some people that are active duty that have contacted me and said that they don't think that the majority of this information will ever reach the public. So I totally agree that we're going to see this discussion move forward. Will we have answers? Will our governments be able to provide answers? I'm not so sure that that's the case. I know that there's some people that do believe that the U.S. government, other world governments do have these answers, and that it's being covered up, and they understand the UFO phenomena. They know what the source is, and so on. There's a part of me that thinks that they are just as clueless as everybody else, and that we're actually just as far away from the answer as we were 70 years ago. And I'm not sure of that, but something says if that's the case, then it could be somebody like you or I that could actually stumble upon an answer or a line of thinking or an idea that does lead to some breakthroughs.
Yeah. The point I'm making on the disclosure thing is that I always believed that UFO disclosure wouldn't happen in any sense, in any form. The government would never admit they were even working on it, and that flipped. And I think consciousness can flip just as quickly. And I was giving the example that started just before we started to talk, which is sort of where I'm at. I'm not sort of into trying to convince anybody. To me, it's always a chess game. It's like trying to figure out how this thing works. Because when I had my first sighting, I saw the sighting the first night, and then the second night, it came at me, which I didn't figure out for 40 years. Why it came at me and then made a left-hand turn and flew into the northeast. Why didn't it just go from the west into the northeast? Why did it come towards me? And then and I was looking at it, I'm going, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. I'm going, and then I figured that I could never figure this out, but somebody had to know what it was. So when I talk about the government thing, I have people, and I don't think it's really the government. I think there's certain people, whether they're in the government or out of the government, who know this sort of thing. And one of them is involved in the latest book, the Skinwalkers of the Pentagon book, and that's Kit Green. And Kit Green, one of the most important things that I think that he revealed links into what Free had been involved with, where Bob was involved with, where you actually go to the people who are having the experiences. Forget about the lights in the sky and stuff like that. You go to the people who are actually interacting with the intelligence, whatever this intelligence is, and you start getting material from them. And in the Free survey, one of the things that was said was that 40% of all the people who had experience that answered the question from this thousands of experiencers who answered said at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And another 20% say they knew the answer to everything about themselves. In near-death experiences, 31% of all people have had near-death experiences say at one point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which gives the idea that all the stuff may be there. There may be no time, no space, no out there. It's all there, and you can access it. So it's the idea of contact modalities. You can get into it. So one of the interviews that I just was listening to was UFO Joe, who had done this interview with Kit Green, and he said to Kit Green, he says, did you ever talk to any, do you ever have any superstar remote viewers? And he said, yeah, I dealt with about 100 remote viewers. There was 3 that he would consider superstars. 2 of them, and he mentions Uri Geller and he mentions Pat Price. According to anything that he was able to verify and check, 100% accurate, which goes to this whole deal that there are some people who can actually get in and get it all, that all that material is accessible. And it's all a matter of accessing the material. And then he mentioned a third woman who is 95% accurate, who's a medical intuitive. So you start to see that it's like playing a piano. Some people are good at it, some people are really good at it, and some people are prodigies at it. And it comes to the whole idea of, can we access this? Can we figure this out? Because it is accessible. All this material is accessible, but you've got to
look, consciousness is information. Yeah, that experience and a million others. Dave and I spoke with Diane Hennessy Powell, leading neuropsychiatrist. I call her a freak. Vita includes Harvard, John Hopkins, ESP Enigma, that she wrote a book. I have a 4-year-old kid, speaks 6 different languages. The autistic savants. We understand who they are, unique skills and limited function in many, many domains of life. Give a 6-year-old like a cube root of a 4-digit number, gives you an answer at the 7 seconds, looking up in the sky, accurate to the 4th decimal point. Accessing an information field. Again, we see bits and pieces in so many different walks of life, from the biologic in the form of autistic savants, for whatever reason, to near-death experience, to UAPs, to being touched by a gray in the bedroom. So say people who are more well-balanced than I, who firmly believe that and are obviously transformed from that moment forward. The point is, people are lit. It's not a matter of contact modalities. It's the fact, I think, that this 3D body, from what they're saying, and I wish I knew like the back of my hand, and that's a struggle I deal with. I'm with Dave on that. I know where Dave lies. I'm a scientist at heart. I struggle with it every day, and I experience something that doesn't make sense to me, yet I know it's real. Why? Because my 3D brain, right? It evolved here, is experiencing, like you did, ESP, mental telepathy, mental intention, callable the exchange of information. I would say that's a non-local event, right? Of course it is. Yeah. Quantum physics explains it. It's 4D, doesn't make sense to you. The brain doesn't make sense to you. We question that all the time. It comes in many different forms. We mentioned this transpersonal event. The free results said just that. And it said more than that. And I know people are critical of it, but it's based on 3,200 people. They claim they're conscious of their interactions. No history of mental illness. It was written by I and Dr. Russ Scampone primarily. He's a statistical expert and experimental psychologist, so there's a lot of validity that have been proven that spoke into it. It's accepted as a refereed by a refereed reviewers. It's very hard to get a journal article accepted, yet it's very rarely referenced within the field of ufology. It really is. You have, I know, because you're interested in consciousness. Not many people are, but it's a byproduct. You see, we see it in UFOs, we see it in NDEs, we see it in OBEs. List goes on and on. DMT, 100%. David Luke just came out with a paper. 100% of people who do DMT, inhaling a small microdose of it, about 100% interact with non-human intelligence. Guess what? The old sense was benevolent. Most people say that with UAPs too, of all shapes and sizes, clowns, sooty grays, and everything between. We know the story, but benevolent. UAPs, it varies. About 10-15% say they're taken physically on board a craft. I know reproductive stuff goes on. It's all hell, but the hybrid stuff, we get some of that in the free study. The vast majority say it's like an OBE. You're floating up to a matrix. Make sense of that. Again, try to describe something 4D with a language system based on 3D meaning and information. It doesn't work. So when we have people provide us with qualitative information in respect to what's the essence of what you responded to, you get like, what you said, we feel this connected with the universe. The way that we describe night, what are they called? Hitchhikers now, Skinwalker book, and days, that's a popular term. We'll be kicking that around for a while. Point is, it's that complex. And that's disclosure. This happens when a pilot says, my whole family is being spooked out because I interacted with a 3D tic-tac, wasn't 3D. It gets so complex and at odds with what we understand reality to be, we can't help but wonder. And that's why we need the experts, at least, and they don't have answers, believe me. We're trying to tie pieces together, wake people up to consciousnessfilm.info. If you resonate with the concept of what we are talking about, the complexity and realistic nature of it all, that people indeed, all of us in varying ways, are experiencing and will continue to experience in varying ways. If you have deep pockets, you resonate with it. We need money, and I hate to beg, but this is the part of a producer. We need money to make it happen. Unfortunately, I hate to beg for 3D reasons. Otherwise, it goes nowhere. For 10,000, throw it on Netflix, 8 people watch it, wake up the world. My book doesn't do it. I'm not in it for the money. If I get some, great. Kids, give it to the grandkids. It's a passion. Dave has it. He's lit. He's bright. And he knows it. He's learning a lot, like I'm learning a lot about production. And we are passionate. It will happen. It will happen, but if somebody knows they're terminal, I'm sorry, where you all die. And if it's your time, you don't want to leave it to the American Pyrotechnic Association and waste money, like I know some people do. Unless you're really into fireworks, give it to a good cause. Waking up people to the complexity of it all, and believe me, it's more complex than we can ever imagine. We are just scratching this Hillebrand thing. Cool. Scratching a surface, my gosh, scratching just a surface. It's still very positive.
I'm glad you brought up Diane Hennessy Powell, because I knew her. I met her in 2012. One of the other examples of somebody you might want to try to stick on there is if you've seen the story of George Finn, who's an autistic guy. I think he's still alive in New York City. This is the guy they had on 60 Minutes where they asked him the left brain stuff. What's 2 times 3? And he goes, would that be 7? And what's 5 times 7? And he goes, would that be 50? And then they ask him, what's the third Wednesday in the year 1 in April? And he says, oh, that's a Tuesday. And they're 100% right, which is with this idea that you can actually pull the stuff out of a field. And when people see that kind of stuff, then you start to realize it's much more complex than what people think. We haven't got. I always say it's going to be, way less physical than people think it is. It's going to be way more spiritual than people think it is, and people aren't going to like that. And it's going to be 1,000 times more complex. The more I look at it, the more complex this thing gets, and the more involved. But I still think you got to go to the people who are actually having the experiences. Even this idea of the hitchhiker. So people have the hitchhiker, and they want to turn it into this evil thing. These hitchhikers. Well, anybody who's done any sort of paranormal research knows that you have ghosts. It's the same thing. You have the hitchhiker effect. It deals with all paranormal phenomena. I was just doing Paul Davids, who did the book about his friend in Hollywood who dies, and he does this study of all the stuff that happens after this guy dies. And the hitchhiker stuff is happening all over the place. It goes from one person to another person to Gary Schwartz and all these people, and it just bizarre as can be. But it's the same sort of phenomena. But the people who are having the experiences, I think, are part of the message. They are part of the thing that we got to look at. Because and I'll give you another example. When I talk to people, you talked about people being on the ship. So then I used to believe that. And then I would say, okay, when they're on the ship, then I would say to them, okay, so you're on the ship? Yeah. You saw an alien? Yeah. Okay, let me ask you, do you have any clothes on? And they go, no, I didn't have any clothes. And I say, didn't you think that was weird? And they go, I never thought about it before. And they say, did he have any sex organs? If it's a real flesh and blood 3D human like you think it is, did it have any sex organs? I've never had anybody say yes yet. I asked Betty Andreasen's husband. I had an interview with Betty Andreasen. 1946, 1940, they had him. I said to her husband, Bob Luca, did the being ever get any older? You've seen this being your entire life. No, he said, aliens live a long time. And you start to see this thing, and the more you look at it, the less physical it becomes, and the more it turns into this consciousness thing, which when you look at it, I think the documentary is fantastic, because people will be really floored by this stuff. I didn't know this. I didn't know this. It is so bizarre, and I think that's what it is. I call it the theory of wow, where they do these really weird things because they want you to pay attention. Because if it isn't weird, you're not going to put it in a documentary. You're not going to pay attention to it. Once you see it, when you have the experience, you're hooked. You cannot leave. It's the whole idea about the left brain trying to figure it out versus noetic experiences that the right brain gets that absolutely sends you down the rabbit hole, and your whole life is flipped upside down.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I started doing when Bob first started
Exactly.
explaining, you know, consciousness to me, and this remarkable set of, you know, phenomena that's associated with it, you know, we started thinking about, well, you know, ESP, life after death, all these different disparate topics. And one thing that I noticed is that the UFO experience really hadn't been put together with these other topic areas in studying consciousness. So the idea that we could put together a film that does include experts that are, you know, perhaps studying a taboo sort of subject matter in, you know, material science, put those people together with the actual experiencers, the people that have had these encounters, people that have, you know, like you said, the Betty Andreasson experience, you know, reading those books when I was younger, it just floored me, some of the type of consciousness stuff, like time events where time would actually stop for certain people that were in the proximity of these events, but then for other people within that same field, time had shifted in a different way, so they experienced time differently. I think that also occurs in some of these other areas of parapsychology and life after death, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, for groups of people that have these time dilation events and so on. So it's all fascinating to me. And again, I'm not an expert in the field of consciousness. The first thing that I discovered when I started looking at it is that science does not believe that consciousness is a primary force in the universe. They believe that our consciousness or our souls emerges from our brain structure, so that we don't have consciousness until we're, you know, conceived, and then our brain creates our personalities, the you, I, me. And that, you know, I was kind of floored by that, thinking that, you know, I thought that it was kind of an unanswered question that perhaps they just didn't know and didn't address it. But I think that neuroscience does teach that this electrochemical structure in the brain creates our consciousness. And when I started looking at it, and some of the researchers that Bob introduced me to, I found out that they were beginning to look at it to say that, you know, consciousness may be a primary force, where consciousness exists before our physical universe and our physical bodies emerge on this planet, for instance. And to me, that resonated a lot, because I think for many of us, we contemplate our lives here and we think, you know, is my personality, is the personality of my loved ones and so on, does that continue? Does it exist before I'm born? Does it exist after I die? You know, when we dream and so on, is our consciousness leaving our physical and interacting with other realms and people that have UAP experiences or life after death experiences? Is that consciousness somehow interacting with another realm of existence? And those are the questions that really started exciting me about this project, because I had contemplated those questions and heard the stories of experiencers and so on that really intrigued me. I don't have a personal experience with it, so I wanted to hear those stories from other people.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it can shift, because I know back in 2012 I had the experience, and I can guarantee you nobody except for maybe Colin Andrews was talking about consciousness inside the UFO community. I remember Jerry Pippin, who was a very famous interviewer at the time, because I was the UFO president guy. And then suddenly I had this thing, and I said, okay, forget the presidents. I mean, I know what's going on now. I've got the answer. I'm on my way to figure out what this thing is. And I was totally revolutionized. And he said, Grant, I can't believe you've done this. I said, what do you mean, Jerry? Said, I can't believe you've given up the president guy to go to this woo-woo stuff. And I said, well, Jerry, I'll tell you what, I didn't actually go there. I kind of got teleported there. There was no way I wasn't going there. And I can remember, if you have remember Jill Bolte Taylor, who was the neuroanatomist from Harvard, who had this left brain hemorrhage thing where she was out in the universe, she was one with the universe and stuff like that. And she describes this experience of 7 weeks with no fear
Genius.
whatsoever. And what does she say? She said, you couldn't talk about it. You could not talk about consciousness. So we've come a long way. And I make the joke that even in ufology today, people talk about consciousness because they know it's a buzzword. You better talk about it. Even though they haven't got a clue what they're talking about, they're starting to use the word. We're starting to make a shift here where every time they bring up say a UFO case, I'll bring up the paranormal aspect to it and say, even this thing with the, the blue orbs. So they have the blue orbs, these blue meanies at Skinwalker Ranch, and Betty Andreasen had the blue orbs back in the 1960s and 50s and whatever. And they actually, and in one regression, they said, "Do you think the blue orbs are protecting you?" And she said, "Yeah, I think they are." So it's this idea when every time you get sort of this negative flesh, nuts and bolts thing, you throw in the consciousness thing, and people are starting to move. People are starting to realize
they are
consciousness aspect to this.
There should be greater emphasis, more than certainly there is. And Valet says it, who I have great respect for, you, as I mentioned, Hynek as well, and a few others who would at least recognize that we should look at every aspect of ufology. The past, I applaud everybody who's involved with nuts and bolts. We need more public, interdisciplinary evidence. Research as academic, non-academic experience to understand this complexity, the complexity of the situation, because there's people more sane than you who are having downloads. They're just not coming out since the people who you mentioned did so. Now that some of that signal is being released, some of them now will begin to talk about it, but will take another 100 years before we get to the point where we finally understand, I think, that there's more than just 3D, and some people are experiencing it. We struggle trying to figure it out. So we looked up Gary Nolan. We talked to him the other day. These went public. The caudate part of the putamen, we have this greater bilateral white connectivity. It's familial. It doesn't. That sounds interesting, doesn't it? Because it runs in families, and we see this experiences. Have a mother or a grandmother, etc. So does that come before or after the experience? That's the other thing. When you had your download, do you have a greater antenna? So with scientists saying, they're doing some research in Harvard there. Are some people a little bit more receptive, a little bit more maybe autistic in some respect? Have that added skill. And maybe there's a biological rationale for that. Not entirely, but maybe there's an integration of energy. Don't you see? We want to get there. Gary Nolan is in our documentary. He's an experiencer, admitted. He's eager to talk about this. He's one of the leading scientists in the world. Nolan Lab, named after him at Stanford University. He wants to be in a documentary. That's pretty cool. Yeah. He has a lot to say. He's doing research at Harvard, stuff that has quite interesting. That does tie in with an external energy, the possibility of an external energy. Call it what you want. I'm hesitant to even start throwing out terms. It gets to quantum physics, and we can go down that rabbit hole, but it makes more sense than gravity and alone and unified field theory. We need that. I'm not dispelling that. We need more than that. We need that paradigm shift. That's what the documentary is about. The paradigm shift, the need for it, the need to close that gap between the subjective, the experiencer, the essence of what they are perceiving. That's non-3D to them, whether it's real or not. Guess what? They feel it's real. It is.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah.
It's a level of reality. We're not there yet. That's a level of reality. You know who makes the most sense to me about all of this? Everything both of you are saying? You know who makes the most sense besides, who? You, Grant. I'm not saying this to getting on a show again. Your discussion of consciousness and UAPs a few years ago, the best lecture I ever heard. And I told you that. I forget when, but I told you that. Maybe at another show. And you know who else? Beat you. A head of an Indian tribe in the Southwest. Forget the gentleman's name. Knowledgeable, doing some quantum mechanics, made more sense about it than they understood the phenomena. The information they were receiving, how to work with it, how to interact. Skinwalker? No way. Are you kidding? Yes, John Alexander told me he was there. Nothing happened to him.
Yeah.
But he's lucky. I want no part. I don't want. I used to say, take me, like Alien, whatever that show was, on the top of the Empire State, but mashed potatoes, making the thing like Richard Dreyfuss. Take me? Nah, hell with that. I don't want to, but.
but then at Skinwalker Ranch, what George Knapp said, and I've done a couple lectures on this. George Knapp said those were the most aggressive to the phenomena had the worst experiences. It's reflective. The phenomena reflects. So if you go in, it's like the old joke: don't take a gun to a CE5. I mean, you could run into some kind of trouble. And so if you go in there with your backup and you're the egos leading and stuff like that. You mentioned Gary Nolan. I'd like to comment on that because I think it's pretty interesting. This is where I say you start looking at these people and you start realizing how many people are experiencers. How many people you hear Hal Puthoff's son has this major UFO sighting right after Phoenix lights in Phoenix, this giant triangle. You get Eric Davis is an experiencer. Gary Nolan's an experiencer. And Gary Nolan also has the download stuff. So Gary Nolan says, I don't know how it works. I don't know if there's little elves in my head or what happens, but I know how to make it work. I sit there and I write the question down. I put it beside the bed and I wake up in the morning and the answer's in my head. This is the kind of stuff where you get these ideas and you realize that we're being led, that we're getting help. That Gary Nolan and even say that when they said to Burroughs, that Burroughs is part of the experiment, and that's what Nolan is doing. He's working with experiencers. When I heard the story, when I heard John Burroughs said that Kit Green told him to meditate and do yoga. I said, he actually told you that? Yeah. And then you go like, wow, they're beyond the pale. They understand a little bit more than what people think they understand. But I acknowledge the fact that they're working with experiencers and trying to figure out how are these people tapped in? Are the antennas? What's going on? And who are we dealing with? Because in the end, you can look at all lights in the sky, but until you talk to the people who are interacting with the intelligence, whatever this is, you're not going to go anywhere.
It's sort of scary. I was reading a little bit about the study that was done that Gary Nolan participated in, that they even talk about some interactions with these experiencers that, like John Burroughs had, that sort of damaged him physiologically. And they talk about some people that had close encounters and close proximity to phenomena that somehow created brain abnormalities, or that, So again, I think that Gary said that some of this stuff isn't really available to the public right now, and even some of his research was eventually closed off to him because it was, a three-letter agency or something that was funding the research. But while that's troubling, and I think people hear about the Skinwalker Ranch phenomena as well, and they, kind of lean towards those experiences that were negative. There's also, I think, a really positive thing, and maybe I'm not sure what that is, what that field interaction is that could potentially harm somebody, harm our bodies if it got too close to this structure or whatever it is. That's this, UAPs. Are they, nuts and bolts craft? Are we observing something that's more like a two-way mirror, where what we perceive isn't necessarily it's an optical illusion, or we're seeing a reflection, so to speak, of what our own psyche can generate versus what this object is, or what this event is. And so, I think that there's like a very interesting transition from this physical description and studying the physical side of it, but then also looking at, what are the consciousness elements of these experiences. And so many of the people that have these experiences, for instance, they may report telepathic communication, and not only telepathic communication, but if you look at the reports, there's oftentimes very similar kind of messages or very similar types of themes that go on. And so, I mean, usually that's just ignored when you look at the cases. They're studying the physical, description of the craft, what happened, trying to see if there's evidence and so on, studying the physical remnants on the ground. But people that have these experiences, oftentimes it continues onward after the events. It goes on for years and years, as many people know, familiar cycles with what used to be called the abduction experience, going back to the first people that were studying that. And they found that it did go on and on and on. So, I mean, I just think that there's so many aspects of that particular subject that do transition into the area of consciousness, and it just really hasn't been studied very much. And I'm hoping that this film will maybe illuminate that a little bit more.
Yeah,
That's right. And that's why when Strauss and Mack spoke and compared their notes of DMT users versus those who were abducted in 340 people, they compared their notes of the essence of the experience. Strassman said he was blown away. Both of them were, by the similarity of the experiences. There is that consciousness component, Dave. Yeah. You know, look, we talk about now uploading consciousness to computers, don't we? You know, that's it's things like we're going to be gone, it's going to happen, but you know, it sounds like it's going to happen. I don't know if you can really capture that and put it in a computer, but if someday they can, if they can, they're talking about stuff that, you know, it gets into almost like VR. Because some of the light phenomena that we are observing, phenomena, whatever it is, could be projections of consciousness on somewhere else that we're able to perfect the concept that we're just trying to start evolving, getting our limited knowledge of technology. They perfected it. Maybe they, you know, bend space time, they hear like that. Maybe it's projections. I don't know. Whatever it is, they don't know either. And they're elected to defend the people, and they're not going to disclose something because they're going to be asked questions by the public. What's really going on? You know, are they just UAPs? It could be China. Don't dismiss that. So most people go with that possibility. That's probably a foreign topic, you know, foreign nation involvement or something else. Event, you know, many will be convinced. Most probably won't. But it puts a question in their mind for sure. It goes way beyond that, and we're trying to wake people up, as Dave said.
You mentioned the DMT thing. I did that as part of my study, and I actually wrote a book on psilocybin. But the DMT thing, I've got an artificial intelligence expert who told me at one point, and I remember looking back at the Strassman stuff. Strassman had, when he first did this study, it was 50% of people were seeing these beings, and he'd say to them, "Were you abducted? Have you ever had a UFO sighting? You ever been abducted?" And then I had this AI guy came to me, and I knew that 25% of people claimed the abduction experience. So I said, and the guy came to me and he said, "I had a DMT experience last night," and he said, "I had a classic abduction experience." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, classic abduction experience." He said, "I could see the arms. I was on a table. They were working on my head. It was classic." So the whole thing is, are the people actually being abducted? What's really going on here?
That's very,
the guy was not going anywhere.
You see what I mean by trying to, it's a chess game. Don't you see what I mean?
It is a chess game.
And you're trying to put the pieces together. I'm trying to do that. I'm, you know, I'm trying, you know, best I can. It's a chess game. That's very interesting what you said. Yeah, what's that all about? The similarities between different kinds of modalities get at the same thing in some ways. So we can only fathom about that. And that's what's so disquieting to the person going through it. And the last thing that person wants to hear is from a psychologist, "I'm sorry, but you need medication for this period of time, and forget about the 27 side effects. You know, this is what you need." The last thing. And there are people like that. And if you're born in Massachusetts in 1853, they burn you. But if you're born in India, you're a goddess. You know, it's so psychocultural. Let alone, don't even get me involved with the psychological community and their limited understanding of this. They're not designed to. I don't mean to criticize them. As more become experiences, it'll weave its way slowly. I see it slowly. Unfortunately, it's a slow process, but it is happening. It is.
I agree. You play a lot of chess. I played a lot of chess as a kid. I stopped playing once I started to lose a couple of games. So I was very good when I was young. And to me, this has always been a chess game. So it's like if I'm playing you, Bob, and you open with King Rook Pawn to King Rook Pawn 4, I go, the hell's he doing? And it's like the anomalies. And that's what Gary Nolan says. I look at the 5% of the anomalies that I can't figure out, because that's where the discovery is. So when you see something really weird, that's why they call it the trickster phenomena. That's why the theory, I call it the theory of wow. Why did you do these really weird things? Because they want to stop you and you go, what is going on? And when you start to go down that aspect, so you're looking at the anomalies, and you know, as you play chess, you don't worry about you. A lot of people play chess. I'm playing this game, I'm going to do the thing. You sit there and you watch the guy make a move, and you figure out, why is he making that move? What's he thinking? What is he seeing? And you don't move that piece until you know what the other guy's doing, and then you set a trap for him or whatever. And I think this phenomenon is the same thing. It's looking at the anomalies, looking at the weird things that don't make sense. That's where the discovery, and a lot of this comes down to exploitation, because what I describe is, before World War II, we were into exploration. So you had Einstein and Max Planck and Bohr and all these guys, and they were talking about there is no matter, consciousness is primary, the observer effect, all this kind of stuff. And as soon as World War II came along, it was shut up and calculate. We've got the equations, just make these bombs, make plastic explosives, make synthetic rubber, jet engines, all this kind of stuff during World War II. And there was 200 inventions, and that's when it all shifted, where no longer we don't care how it works. And I've heard people say this, the UFO thing, I don't care how it works. Or Ken Kress, who was the remote view guy from CIA, who ran the remote viewing program, he said, and almost to quote him, he said, I never knew how it worked. I don't know how it works. I don't care how it works. The only thing I was interested in is, does remote viewing work? And if it does, how do I make it operational? And that's what we're doing. We're doing this shut up and calculate thing, is how do we get some technology? How do we get this kind of stuff? And you and I are playing the anomalies, trying to figure, we're back in pre-World War II trying to figure this thing out.
Grant, look at the tough road you're going here. What's UAP? I don't know. What's consciousness? I don't know. Bob, what's UAPs and consciousness? You know, I'm sorry, but excuse me for that. You know, transcribe that, computer. But
well, it's real, right? I mean, it's like, we know it's real, but we don't know what it is. We know all of these things are real. So
exactly, no, that's exactly right. We know there is a physical component to it. That's true. But you just said it. The answer: remote viewing. It takes one white crow, one person to bend the spoon legitimately. That's all you need. I'm sure they threw Ingo Swann at the things in the sky. I'm sure they did. You know, rumor has it he didn't like what he saw. Let's not go there. I won't do it again. Yeah. But that's all you need. And I know it's a rare skill. People claim it. What does out of body mean? What does NDE? Well, NDE, we do have criteria, thanks to Moody, Grayson, etc. But what do you mean by an OBE? What do you mean by the Kundalini? What do you mean by UAP? You know, most of the things about UAPs, I'll tell you, you know, it gets me into these luminous area phenomena. I hate to bring up plasma. It's a long shot. I mentioned other shows. You know, I don't know if it's completely discounted. Let me go through this quickly, please. Unless you know that intelligence and plasma are not connected. And I look at the pieces like a chess player. Quickly, David Bohm, student of Einstein, you mix some electrons with plasma and you know, the fourth thing of matter, along with solid air, liquid, and comprises what, 99% of the universe. The point is, you add some electrons to it. He described it as a life form. It had life properties. Fast forward, plasma physicists at Russia came to the same conclusion, and then some. Plasma, life form, cellular material. Harvey Rutledge, Project Identification, Eunice Story, studied the luminous lights in the sky in Missouri back in the 80s for a decade through the scientific method. Conclusion: they're intelligent, willful intention, purpose. Okay, all right. What? Fast forward to, you know, Massimo Teodorani, the hat-down lights, 2-3 decades, again, scientific method, 1 and 1 equals 2 at it, many papers, geomagnetic, it's earthly in whatever way. Read his last paper. Read his last paper or two, okay? It's interesting how he changed his tune, similar to what Harvey Rutledge said, different time, different place, 2 scientists. What do I know about UAPs? I'm just talking about plasma. And I'm not saying they're right or there's intelligence to it. They describe it as synchronicity, plays games with your head. It just interacts with you, turns on to off, responsive to light. I'm sure we've tried everything, thrown everything at whatever it is. You know, plasma at night. The point is, some of this could maybe, you know, coexisting life forms. There's nothing unique to that. that we don't understand. Of course, we see new species in the sea. We get all that. However, are quantum processes external to us, plasma and other things? Other things. I mean, there are solid objects in the daytime too that are probably not plasma. I get it. Different kinds of things that are interacting with the brain using a process of quantum physics, torsion, energy, spin. It's all existing in every dimension. Spin is from the subatomic to the cosmological. That's part of the documentary, showing that this information exchange exists everywhere. The connection between every level, ESP, human to human, human to physical systems, psychokinesis, it's real. Dean Radin, head of IONS, will be in our documentary testifying to that. It's statistical, it's subtle, but it is real. Doesn't mean I could bend a spoon. Uri Geller claims he can, a few others as well. But the point is, there are, and we have found more than one white crow, rare, of course, but we have more than ample evidence to know that precognition exists. What you two gentlemen described as a time distortion reminded me of Cornell the psychologist Darrell Bem, where the future predicts the past. Quantum physics is explainable in terms of no space, no time. People report that. 360-degree view. I had a near-death experience with 20 blind people who had an NDE. Was surprised to find out that when you die, you're not supposed to see 360. They found it very, very strange that, we only see pie-shaped. Blind people who have near-death experiences who do pierce the veil of an alternate realm and experience. Visual stimuli. Explain that. Jeff Long, again, who qualitative evidence such as that should be a basis of a master thesis and dissertation on the Research Foundation, Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, wealth of vast qualitative information there. It's very informative what people are trying to describe about their experience in the other side.
That 360 degrees, that's one of the weird chess moves. When you see that, you go, what the heck? Because that doesn't, if you're going to make up a story, you're not going to make up a story. You could see 360 degrees. That is reported by people on board a ship. I've got a guy from England, and he's one of the people. I've got 50 people. I remember I was talking to Ray about 14% of all people say they've flown the craft. And I said to Ray, we should talk to these people that have flown the craft. And he didn't really buy into it, but I've got 50 people who've flown the craft. And the guy from England, from Liverpool, England, said, I put my hand on this panel. I became one with the craft. The craft was alive. It was conscious. And whatever I thought was what the craft did, and I could see in 360-degree vision. And that's when you start looking at the anomalies and you realize that these things are across the board. This is not just UFOs or it goes across the paranormal thing. And you can start to sort of unravel this thing. And the thing with the people flying the craft is I've got 50 people and nobody has ever said anything different. And it includes United Airlines, 747 Airlines pilots, retired U.S. Air Force colonels. Everybody says the same thing. I went into the craft and they told me, go ahead and do it. I put my hand, like I'll tell you, the F-16 guy, he said, I saw this panel, I put my hand on the panel, and he said, suddenly I was flying the craft. He said, I'm flying the thing, I'm one with the craft is alive, I'm conscious with the craft, and I thought it was a dream. I said, everybody thinks it's a dream. Just tell me what you remember. And it was this whole idea is whatever I could think. And he said, so I took my hand off, my one hand off. He said it was like F-16 suction cups, whatever that means. And he said, I took the one hand off and I thought the craft was going to stall and the craft kept flying. And then he said, I took my other hand off the panel about 6 inches off and I was ready to slam it back down in case the UFO stalled. And he said it can continue to fly. He had his hands off the thing. And you hear this over and over again. And that's this connection that everybody who's flown the craft will say the same thing. You use your mind. And I remember in 2013, I had my download experience. My first UFO consciousness lecture was 2013. They had said, are you going to talk to Pam Dupuy? And I said, I guess so. I figured I must have agreed. And the woman came in. She was, remote viewer and whatever. She's telling me all these weird stories, whatever. And she's in her 70s. And then she told me, she says, I was flying the craft last night. I said, you were what? It's like, come on, you're flying the craft? She said, yeah, I was flying the craft. I said, they let you fly the craft. It said, yeah, they let me fly the craft. I couldn't believe it. And I was ready to throw her out of the house. And then I said, well, how do you fly the craft? And she said, you do it with your mind. And as soon as she said that, it was like this aha moment. It's like, oh, that's why they stuck me together with this woman. And this key key connection that people don't realize, that some people do realize. The fact, even the Roswell people told me, oh, we knew this in the 1990s, that the chairs are all, some of the chairs that the people sit in are body formed, which I've heard as well. You put your hands in these little holes. And the guy from, I had a guy, a real religious guy, a Mormon guy out of Salt Lake City area, who told me, he said, they asked him, they said, you're flying the craft, what do you want to do? He said, I'd like to go and I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. They said it'll be 1 second of intense G-force, stand by. And he said it was like watching the pages of a book as they went through the dimensions, like this. And he said in 1 second, he was outside the Milky Way looking back. And you hear this over and over again. So when someone says they've flown the craft, they say, hang on, start from the beginning, don't miss anything. And I record it, and everybody says identically the same thing. And you start to get these things about 360-degree vision, about consciousness being primary, the craft is alive, it's a live organism and stuff like that. And to me, that is, so when I had my experience in 2012, it was almost like I was being guided, because I had no interest in the subject, same as I had no interest in UFOs when I had my UFO sighting. They threw me down the rabbit hole, and then all these people started to appear in my path. And it's almost like I've been given all this material as it comes in. And it goes even into things like the one with the you talked about the one white crow. I'm doing this experiment where eventually I'm gonna do it, where you have people who are trans channelers. And JZ Knight was the first one to report this, that when she trans channeled, her DNA changed. And I go, so is it DNA change causing consciousness, or is consciousness building DNA? Is it the chicken egg? What's primary? So I ran these experiments, and Lynn Buchanan, who is one of the top remote viewers for the Army, said that he was given a target to mind meld with Saddam Hussein. And he said when he was doing the target, when he mind melded with Saddam Hussein, his eyes changed from blue to brown. And then you have the remote guy, Paul Selleck, who's a big channeler, who's channeled 10 books. He said when he channels, his eyes change color. That's DNA changing. That's what I'm looking for, the second white crow, is if you get a second one where you can actually get a physical experiment where a trance channeler's DNA changes when they're in trance, the whole world is flipped upside down. The whole idea of the physical world is gone. Or the other one I'm working on is this thing with the blindfold kids, which just doesn't catch on. I know Leslie Kane is working on this, but this is this whole idea that you put a blindfold on a kid. Within 5 minutes, that kid can see color and he can read books in a couple of days or whatever. And this whole idea, if that is true, that you can take a kid with a blindfold and you see them playing games, they're playing soccer games and playing baseball and stuff with blindfolds on, the whole world, we have no clue. It just flips that whole idea about what is consciousness. So I think I'm very excited about what's going on in terms of you guys doing this documentary, getting this stuff out, because I think the world is shifting, and I think we're being helped to move this ball. And I don't think it's going to be that far down the road. I'm very optimistic that you can hear Lou Elizondo start talking about that, where they said, is this on world or off world? And he says, well, hang on. There's other possibilities. And I remember there's an experiencer in Israel who contacted me, said, did you hear what Lou Elizondo said? We had a whole show on this, that we both picked up the fact that he's saying, hey, this may not be, this may be here. It may mean no time and space. Look at quantum physics, that everybody's making these assumptions. It's ET, it's this, whatever. And when you hear Lou Elizondo say, well, hang on, he can't talk about what he knows, but he's indicating there's something in the background that we aren't being told about. And I'll guarantee you it's got to do with consciousness.
One of the things that I was just thinking of is that, when Bob and I first started talking about this consciousness project, I think at least I was like, this is an open blank canvas, really, because I didn't have a conception of where it was going to lead us and who was going to come into our sphere, who was going to help us, who's going to suddenly get an email, or somebody calls you on the phone, or you're walking down the street and something appears in front of you that you're not expecting. So to me, this project is like that, where I think that I don't know what the answer is. It's just really exciting, and this film project I think is going to create itself as time goes on. And what's the next thing that's going to happen? I'm not sure. Bob may know, but I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, and you do have some big names. I mean, you're all the people that you got on your show. I've Watch these people very carefully, their research.
It is.
There are a lot of people, even this, most of them will have signed this thing about the post-materialistic paper that they all signed on to, this idea that we were beyond materialism and stuff like that. Like Diane Hennessy Powell's on that list. There's a bunch of them where you start to realize there's a lot of people clued into this thing, and it's just making people aware of the fact that these people are out there, because everybody's still into how do you make money with this thing, how do we turn it into weapons and stuff like that. And you probably know that consciousness is not a thing where you can really make money. Even the UFO thing was a thing you could make money until because when it was done under the Obama administration under Leslie Kean, if you read Leslie Kean's book, they weren't talking about evil aliens or anything. They were talking about a threat to airline traffic, and I guess everybody sort of laughed at them. And then they decided, well, we'd go into this thing that's interfering with military operations, and there's a $736 billion defense budget, and we can get some money from this to get the research. So it shifted, but you need a need, and the consciousness thing is one step behind. But I'm pretty sure a lot of these people realize this aspect. Even Kit Green, when he's talking to, and he's the guy who's working with Gary Nolan with the experiencers. When Peniston asked him, and that you mentioned this thing about John Burroughs being injured. Well, John Burroughs was injured, but Jim Peniston was closer to the craft when it flared up. And Kabanzak was there as well. So the question is, why did John Burroughs get injured and the other two guys didn't get injured? If it's a field effect, John Burroughs or Peniston should have been the guy injured, and it wasn't. One of the stories was that John Burroughs pulled a gun. And that may explain this whole thing about why people have the good effects and bad effects. But getting back to Peniston, when he had a meeting with Kit Green in about 2013, he came to get his DNA and do the MRI that they're doing for the Kutamen thing. And he said, no, you're not going to get it. What do you mean? You tell me what's going on. What are you doing? And he said, we're working with eight people, and we're working with experiencers. And Bigelow had the contract, and Nolan, he didn't mention Nolan, but he said, we're working on propulsion. And that's when Peniston said, what are you talking about propulsion? What do you think, I'm stupid? Like, I mean, it's not propulsion. He said, well, maybe we used the wrong word. We're trying to figure out how does the phenomena pop in and leave just as quickly. And then you start looking at that and you go, oh, this is like the old deal is they're popping in, they're popping out. This is not what people think it is. They're not flying from outer space through, thousands of years to get here, whatever. It's a whole different thing. And when you hear Kid Green saying that, you realize that these people realize the implications of this thing. But the thing is to make some money from it, to actually get people to finance it, which is the problem that you would have here. Is you've got to get people to understand the importance of consciousness in this whole thing to buy into this thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I talk to, again, I'm coming at it kind of cold, and I don't, I haven't researched consciousness like Dr. Davis has. So I can talk that language to people, and when I start even bringing it up, usually their eyes glaze over and they change the subject. That's it's not common conversation with people. I mean, I like to bring up the idea that, hey, why are we here on this planet? I mean, is it possible that some of this phenomena that we're experiencing is consciousness, but it also could be sourced in our own souls? Like, for instance, if we exist as, say, Gestalt personalities, and this stuff comes from that material I talked to you about earlier in the very beginning of the show. What that entity was saying is that the human soul is eternal, that the validity of the human soul is eternal, and that we exist as gestalts, so that we have multiple personalities that exist outside physical reality and outside of time, so that we actually can interact with multiple personalities on this planet or in other realms of existence. And so we have a reason for being here. So if that is remotely true, that we exist outside of time, outside of this physical dimensional space that we live for 100 years or so, could it mean that then there's forces that we are involved with personally, perhaps ourselves or other family members that go back millennia, that we are involved in other activities that we're not even aware of, and it has repercussions, and there's reasons for these long-term events to occur, and these events are happening. We do have free will, but we are interacting with this other realm of existence that's outside physical space, so that when we're seeing these like strange phenomena, for instance, paranormal phenomena or UAP, is that evidence that we're seeing a bridge from another realm of existence to physical reality. And that's why it's unexplainable at this point, because obviously modern physics and science would totally discount anything outside of that reductionist physics, creating the universe and the laws and so on, that can't happen. There can't be, another dimension outside of time that could come through dimensionally into this space. But my contention here is that we may have more responsibility in some of these things that we're experiencing. So if something happens, it may seem that this is a random event just because we don't have conscious awareness of what it is. But maybe we do interact with that in some way. Perhaps when we fall asleep and we dream, we're more aware of what's going on. Or, before or after our lives here, we're aware of what's taking place. But during this time on Earth, we're just completely, purposely blind to all of that. We can't see this kind of evolution in humanity that's taking place. But, I have great faith that as time goes on, that we're going to become more and more aware of the true nature of the human soul and why we're here, what it means to die, what it means for our loved ones that have passed on. Are they just gone? Are they vaporized as our brains die off? Because as science says, it's just a electrochemical effect of our brain. Or is there actually hope that, we do survive bodily death? And I think that this film kind of looks at that whole subject area. And if one thing that I can do by telling the story or letting some of the experts explain this is give people hope that, hey, yeah, science may one day bridge this idea that there is, consciousness outside of our physical body, and that they will eventually get to a point where it can even be explained through quantum mechanics or some other advanced paradigm in science.
Let me make a comment on that, because one of the biggest interviews I ever did that I was most happy about is I did the interview with Leslie Kean. So Leslie Kean is the one that wrote the big article for the New York Times that blew the UFO thing wide, and she was into physical mediums. I'm into physical mediums because this is a key. It's one of the pieces on the board you got to watch because it tells you a lot. And I said, Leslie, tell me the story about the hand. Did it actually happen? She said, yeah, it actually happened. And so this is the whole thing. How does the phenomena come into the world and leave, go back into wherever it is? And I always remind people the thing that quantum physics, I think it's generally accepted. There may not be time and space. And as John Wheeler said, there may be no out there. It's all in your head. There is no out there. It's all happening here now at the same time. And that sort of blows everything. But Leslie Kean, when she said, well, the table was there. And she said this happened a number of times. The table was there, and she said this sort of watery stuff would come up on the table, and this hand appeared, and she said she felt it. And I said, did it feel? She said it was absolutely a real hand. It was warm. She could feel the knuckles and sort of stuff like that. And then it banged on the table, and then it just disappeared. And that's where I say, and Leslie Kean is not off the street person. She's a top person. This is Leslie Kean saying this from the New York Times. Said, I saw this a number of times. I touched the hand and it went back in. So it comes into the physical world, it manifests in the physical world, and then it goes back again, which is exactly what Yossi Ronan said in an experiencer in the Israel said. They told him, when we come into your world, we have to take on a body. We can take on any type of body we want, but we don't have to. You can do the same thing, you just don't know it yet. And it's this idea that may not be as physical as we think it is. And I think quantum physics, the whole leading edge of what modern kids are going to believe, because what's going to happen is, as Max Planck says, it's one funeral at a time. Things do not advance by convincing people. They're convinced by new ideas coming in, and the young people adopt it and they go. I think that the young people already would generally concede the time and space is probably an illusion. It's all happening here and now. It's like a deck of cards, and it's not the physical world. So I think the physical world is it's a matter of time till it sort of fades away. That we've even you mentioned the thing about the reincarnation. According to the Free Survey, 25% of all people said that they had the beings had talked to them about past lives, about reincarnation. And that Mac has one experience where he's talking to one experience and said, when did you first meet them? Oh, they were in my last life. And you start to see this, you start looking at the literature and you realize that this is probably going to be true, that it's coming across. And that's where I always ask the question about, did it have sex organs? Did it have a mouth? Did it have a nose? Did it have a belly button? Did it have nipples? Did it wear clothes? Why do ghosts wear clothes? Why do
Yeah, but why are you asking it? Yeah, you see, we need, you should be asking. I applaud you for doing that. You're asking the right questions. Get at the essence of the experience, integrating science as subjective with the physical, which is what we're discussing. And they're doing that in some studies, limited, fragmented by only a few, unfortunately. That's why we need social anthropologists and linguists looking at that, psychologists, asking those questions, trying to make sense of the language. What's the thought process, the concept that they're trying to express with the limited vocabulary of their true feelings in order to tie it in? And that's what Luke and a few others are trying to do with NDEs, with some degree of success, limited in nature, and DMTs, trying to, again, understand or try to quantify as best as possible. And unfortunately, we can't with consciousness unless everything is conscious at some level, and probably is. Information exchange from desk, don't do it again, it's painful, to everything else. We're getting some information from some source all the time. Maybe not when we're sleeping, but that's another story. But that's the point, Grant. And maybe it is a left brain, right brain thing that people are now struggling with. Come to the realization, as you addressed, trying to understand that, something, this really isn't just 3D. Maybe there really is a 4D. And I think asking the question for the first time is the right step. And then once that awakening process, as I want to say, gets going, that's consciousness. And it seems science is marrying the torsion energy, integrating with the brain, the spin force. Everything's involved. We're all one, bombs, intricate, explicate order, what everybody's saying, and realizing Nobel laureates and recognition for the fact that they believe in consciousness envelops the ether of the earth. People forget these concepts that have been expressed in folklore, in the Bible, on cave walls. That's appropriate for the language and science of the times. We're saying the same things. We're throwing 2021 at it. We threw Engel Swan at it. We threw whatever white crow we can at it. Yeah, you're right. We still don't have an answer. Still, I feel good that of the bill that was passed, but in the big scheme of things, it's a right step in the right direction in a long evolving task.
Well, I mean, they're looking at, again, they're looking at the nuts and bolts, right? I mean, they're looking at the advanced sensors and so on, but they're completely ignoring this whole other side of the equation, which would be people that perhaps are reporting a direct interaction with non-human intelligence, or as I think maybe it has more to do with human intelligence than we know about. It's just not human intelligence that we're aware of here. It's a communication that could be telepathic. As many UFO experiencers report, all of this information is being, that they're gleaning and communicating. It's all telepathic, and the beings they experience that seem to have a humanoid form don't seem to look like, a biological entity that we'd see here on the planet, like with sex organs, as Grant mentioned, and so on. It's more amorphous and oftentimes difficult to describe. They're kind of fuzzy and so on in the drawings. And I don't know, why people experience that. I mean, if it really is a physical craft, or is the craft itself a transdimensional portal, a transdimensional means of entering into our physical reality. And once inside that space, then it's not the same as here on Earth. Once you kind of go past that portal. One of the things I was thinking of when we were talking to Diane Hennessy Powell, one of the things that just kind of made my jaw open, and I didn't know this, and this is the first time I heard this about sort of memory and consciousness, because she's looking at it from a neuroscience perspective of what is consciousness, how do we interact with consciousness. One of her theories is that the brain acts as a filter, that consciousness is primary and that we have access to all the information in the universe, and that perhaps this field of consciousness, that our brains are actually a filter that's created for evolutionary survival on this planet. So in other words, it's actually filtering out everything except a very finite amount of information that we use to survive. And then she goes on to talk about autistic savants, and she was in her PowerPoint, she was presenting MRI scans of some of these individuals, some that might exhibit just, kind of prodigy behavior, for instance, being able to recite a piano concerto after hearing it one time and play it back with absolutely no training. There's individuals that have those skill sets. And then she would juxtapose that with an MRI of the brain, which would show, vast areas of the brain that are just filled with fluid. And most of the cerebral cortex and stuff is missing in some of these individuals. And that goes directly against the idea that the brain kind of creates consciousness, or our memory systems and our cognitive abilities are completely based in the brain. And you have an individual whose brain physiology is almost gone and completely missing, yet they are exhibiting this incredible capacity of memory. And
you're exactly right, Dave. And we learn a lot about what's normal by looking at pathology. And we do learn a lot about what is right, looking for answers along those lines. It goes back to the holographic nature of the brain. That one piece represents the whole. Break a glass, a mirror, and just one piece represents the whole. It goes into the holographic concept of reality and consciousness, ascribed to by Edgar Mitchell, who also had a peak-like experience, an epiphany, when he walked on the moon and re-entered and saw the blue dot in space, as William Shatner did. They had a peak experience. You question reality. It was positive in their example. But the point is, we see the parallels, the analogy between body activity, quantum processes at the DNA and cellular level. This has been proven, shown, that consciousness is given rise to, is facilitated by quantum events that are happening at the microtubule levels. We all have heard about that theory, the Hemmerhoff, Penrose. I'd like to see it duplicated many times, but they are leading scientists in their fields, and these studies have been fairly well verified. Consciousness at one level, at the brain level. The point is, there's many different points of views regarding consciousness. An anesthesiologist will say it's wakefulness in the ER. The psychologist says it's cognitive psychology diatribe, but cosmologist gives you a different answer. So we don't know what really we're talking about. But I ascribe to the information, as I mentioned earlier, exchange. Even electrons communicate with one another. Cells in the body do. The brain is analogous to the universe. Plasma communicates with each other. We see light orbs communicate. And it's interesting, the analogies that can be made between our 3D body and our 4D existence beyond it. 3D is not compatible in certainly many ways, but people are experiencing it. And that's the enigma. That's the difficulty when left-brain people, highly logical people who live in a laboratory most of their life, suddenly become experiencers, sometimes spontaneously overnight. What do they do with that? What do I do after working for 3 decades in a laboratory setting, teaching, administrating, and all that sort of stuff? Publish or perish, the scene. And someone saying in the night comes up to me and says, and I said this before, great touched me. Michael J. Carter, you know him, Grant. Michael J. Carter, a great touched me. Read his book. Him and millions of others, a great touch me. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do with that? I've said that a million times. I'll say it over and over again. It makes no sense to this, but I've experienced it. A great never touched me. I've experienced it enough to get the cork out, as I like to say. We have our definite expressions about that. And you can't get back in. I want the answers. Always curious. That's our spiritual quest. The right brain now is a little bit awake because of my experience of questioning reality. Thus, I want more. I know there's more. I know because I experienced something that's non-3D. So I am curious as hell. It's like playing chess. I'm curious if I'm going to win. I'm curious what the next move's going to be. I'm curious.
Well, Bob,
I want to win.
Don't you think though that when we first started talking about this interesting project, I mean, I've always, even with the UFO stuff, I've always wanted to keep it, the content verifiable, and not go into belief too much, but try to keep the evidence that we have. So with this project, that's something that I tell people is that we do want to explore this from the perspective of the leading experts that actually are investigating the idea of human consciousness and trying to define it. But as you said, there doesn't seem to be an answer, and we don't really know what consciousness is. And that's something that is, when you begin looking at this, you find out that no, we don't know what consciousness is. Science does not know. It's one of the last huge mysteries, the hard problem of consciousness, as they call it. And I think that's one of the kind of angles that we're taking. We're not just going to show stories of people that have had out-of-body experiences and let them tell the whole story of it. We do want to look at the scientific aspect of it and bring it back to that. And maybe we won't have an answer at the end of the film, but I think that at least we're going to try to look at it from that perspective.
Exactly.
A point on your thing about the brain. I'm always going to say consciousness is primary. That you can have all sorts of stuff, the microtubulars and all this kind of stuff. It's all correlated. It's all involved, but it's not the basic process. I would still say, if you go back to Seth, you manifest what happens around you. There is no other rule. And you get into psychedelics. See, when you talk about brains, when the psychedelics, they did the big study at London College where they figured the brain was going to be like fireworks going off, and they found out the brain was actually quieting down when they went under psychedelics. And that's this whole filter thing. Is the whole idea is, in order to get in the field, you've got to shut down the rational, analytical left brain. That's the number one rule of remote viewing, according to Joe McMoneagle. There is only one rule: empty your mind. Everything that you don't empty from your mind is going to affect the target. And when you look at remote viewing, what is remote viewing doing? You have a target. You don't even know what it is. It's in an envelope. You just have a number. And this consciousness is able to go and find the target and answer the question in any time and space. And all time and space starts to fall apart when you look at remote viewing. The whole idea of out there, it's just as easy to remote view on the other side of the earth as it is here or in the past as it is now. And this whole thing, and I'd still say, I think we know more than we're letting on, because Max Planck said, this is back 100 years ago, said matter, I'm talking as an authority, matter does not really exist. Mind consciousness is the primary thing. So I think we've sort of understood this, and it's just a matter of the mechanics of it. But I think that's where we're giving people. I don't think these experiences are random. I do not for a moment, I won't get into it, think my experience in 1975 was random. I don't think my download experience was random. I started looking back on all this kind of stuff, and it goes to this idea that Dave, you were mentioning, that it may all be pre-birth, because I asked all the major regressionists. I asked Mary Rodwell. I asked Kathy Martin. I asked Barbara Lamb. I said, if you were to regress everybody back to birth, how many would say, yes, they agreed to this, to be a part of this abduction experience? And Mary Rodwell said, yeah, like 100%. They basically all say 100%. Kathy Martin told me, I asked her, she said, I used to wonder about that question. So I actually had myself regress, and I heard the voice come out of my mouth. I agreed to this. And this is the idea. It may go back into past lives. It may all be just a sort of a video game where we're coming in, we're playing this game, and we're all avatars, and we're in control of the thing. We are not victims. We are playing this game. And so I always look at it as a value that all three of us, are here at this time, in this place, in the middle of whatever mess we think we're in, and we're here to do this consciousness thing. We agreed to come in here. We may have had an agreement before we came in and said we're going to come in, and you start looking at all the literature, whether it's Michael Newton literature or the experiencer literature, it all basically says the same thing. Yes, these people are all coming in. There's this gradual evolution of consciousness, and there's a shift taking place, and we are part of the shift, and we come in to do this. And it doesn't really matter whether we succeed or not. It's, did we do something with what we came in? Because that's all the data I see all seems to lead to the fact that it is not one life. It is, even if you get to the body, we assume so much stuff, like the body. Everybody says, oh, it's just the cells dividing. And I say the whole thing of the limit case for credulity. which Terence McKenna used to say. If you have the human body, there's 200 different cells in the human body. Every day, 330 billion cells die in the human body. Every single day, 330 billion cells are rebuilt in the human body. And everybody's saying, just happened. It's like, bull, it happened. Come on, give your head a shake. There's consciousness that you can see this, and whatever system you look at, the more you look at it, the more complex it gets, and the more consciousness based it gets. And that's what the experiences have been telling us all along. It's all conscious. This is what this is about. Consciousness is the basics of this thing. And in 2012, as I said, nobody would talk to me in 2012. A lot of people cut me loose, but the world has changed in only 10 years. I am really surprised how far we've come just from 2012.
Grant, I've talked to too many so-called experiences, especially those who've had NDEs. This is the best research I've done since the 7+ years I've been retired. In fact, the evidence is more compelling than the quantitative stuff that's a diatribe in most of the scientific journals. There's more evidence that ESP exists than the medicine that we take in terms of their safety and efficacy. It's true. People don't understand that ESP is real. And when you mention Consciousness Project, right, there is some esoteric aspect to it. There'll be more information about the name of the documentary that ties in the importance of the integration of spirituality, religious concepts, scientific, something that appeals to everybody. That what we are addressing has always been represented in various ways, in biblical texts, folklore, in all countries throughout time. It's not unique to the UAP by no means. UAP is a branch of a tree. And it's a smorgasbord it's like the Walmart of the paranormal, let's face it. But it's unique in that respect. And but nevertheless, many people do have interactions with it. But when you mentioned the free study, most of the interactions are OB related. It seems to be a conscious component, but it is physical. The Hopkins and Jacobs, when they started seeing people, and I commend them for their efforts to help many people, they largely regarded it as a terrifying horrendous experience using hypnotic regression. And of course it is. First few times, how can it not be? Especially if you see a reptilian, although most people see an energy being, which is interesting, according to the free survey of 3,200 plus people. But nevertheless, over time, the more abductions, contactees, shall we say, conscious especially, but also physical, over time, especially those who had 10 plus, 20 plus, 90% of them don't want it to end. You've heard that statistic before. You've heard me say that before. And you can't forget that. But the point is, what does that mean? Does that mean you also don't want the ghosts in your house to leave that often? That means you don't want to have an NDE again? When people have NDEs, they say, you know what, Bob? With passion and more belief than to have a hand in front of their face, I'm going home. The Lord can take me today and say, you're going to die today. And I'll say, I can't wait. Why? Because I had an NDE before. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do with that? PhD in this. Okay, I know something about this. It doesn't mean I know everything about anything else in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, obviously, let's face facts. Point is, what am I who's followed the scientific method, which is good and bad, and at least I'm aware that there's a negative aspect to the scientific method, too Newtonian, too quantitative. And believe me, a major shortfall. We need it, helps us, all that. What am I supposed to do with it when people tell me they're going to go home, they can't wait for death, the people have ended? You know the story.
Yeah.
So we're frustrated when we hear that. Why? Did it pierce the veil and that's reality? Do we have to redefine reality, meaning different types of reality? A physical reality, my brain knows what my kidneys are doing. The kidney's not working well, it talks to another organ to produce this kind of protein to compensate these thermostats. Ballet talks about a control system, remember? Of course. And it's an interesting analogy. This control, we hear that term, we forget about it. To his credit, back in 70s, Hynek, that a phenomenon so foreign to our mode of thinking. You were there, this. It was something like that when Hynek said that.
Nuts. I used to think he was crazy.
Right. But he and then you came around, but you had to become an experiencer.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful you did, and thank you for your support and all that. But you know a lot of them. Like, who I wish who was here besides Stanton, obviously, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. I don't know if you know her, a good friend of mine who passed away 2 years ago.
Yeah.
She knew, boy, Dave, you would have loved her. She would have been in the documentary.
Yeah.
She, what a researcher, to her credit. It reminds me of a, what's her name, who works with Burroughs, Linda Moon Howe type, journalist background. Dave has a journalist background. You see, he brings that level of investigative reporting, that mindset, the keen cognitive insight. He brings that into the arena. That's why he makes so much darn sense. He sounds, he knows what he's talking about. So he studies a great deal. So he not only has that production capability, that professionalism there, but he also brings the knowledge, and we're going to appeal to the masses overall. Don't go just by the title, but you're right. That title has to be expanded upon, and it will be. To me, it means everything. It doesn't include religion at all. It's part of it. There's truth in everything. It's integrating it like chess. Good luck to us. Let's try to not be so frustrated as we go down the rabbit hole. But today's a good day. Let's have a cupcake with a candle in it, or something even better than that, because it was on today's USA this morning on the news. At least it's waking some people up. And if I may say for the fourth time, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your unique ways in which you are bringing this to the attention of everybody. And Dave and I, through the Consciousness Connection, consciousnessfilm.info is the website. If you can support it in any way, if you resonate with what we're saying, and you don't mind sharing some of your wealth and good cheer, thank you very much for.
And if you'd like to be part of the process too, we are seeking sponsors and partners and people that want to collaborate and have ideas and so on, and get involved with that. We do have a Facebook group as well that you can participate with. Bob and I are always reachable, and we're open to brainstorming this. And I mean, when I first approached it and I first learned about some of these topics, I was so excited because it really is a mystery. I mean, this is one of these mysteries, kind of like the UFO phenomena, where there's really no good answer. I mean, people have a lot of hypothesis about this, and the scientific community might look at the physiological system of the brain, but then there's a lot of other people that have these really remarkable ideas, and you hear one idea and you're like, oh, that's it, that's definitely they're on the right track, and then the next day somebody else comes along. And when you have these kind of wide open spaces, you stare out to the horizon and there's no answer, and you're like, what's going to happen next? That's some of the best stuff. And I'm really excited. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what the next chess piece is going to move for, in our play in this game, so to speak. But like Grant said, I hope that we do kind of present some of this information, and that young people in the next generation picks it up and says, you know what? I mean, this is a new paradigm, and that we should try to understand why we're here. What is consciousness? What is it? What is it to be human? Why are we going through this? I mean, what are these challenges and these events that we participate here on the planet? The pandemic, the little dramas in our own lives. Why do we go through these experiences? There's a reason for that. And I think humanity is going to open up to this, and one small step, one little piece at a time, to kind of figure out what our role is in the universe, or the universes, so to speak. And maybe having positive intention to present this message, and to be open to whatever answers come forward is part of that. Because I don't have all the answers. I know Bob. I mean, half the stuff Bob talks about, it goes like that. But I'm gonna drink the coffee, and tomorrow morning I think maybe it'll taste different. But
well, right? Look, your knowledge and production, I feel the same way. And as far as this whole phenomenon goes, we're like the Three Stooges here. But look, we're on the right track. A lot of things we say are true. A lot of things we say are off base. But the point is, look at where we were just a few decades ago. Look where we are today. Evolution does happen, but it's slow. So let's be patient along the way. A documentary here or there is much needed. There's some good ones out there. Too many poor ones. Ours will be an extraordinary one. Like Dave said, we do need support and sponsorship for a very good cause. Let's take it to the next level. And so let's keep it going. And these kind of podcasts and social networking and isolation at home, if there's any good that comes out of that, it's maybe just that people are communicating about all of this a little bit more so, meditating more, unfortunately, having more death experiences. The only good thing is that maybe they come a little more awake in the process. Maybe that's the only good thing. And I can't think of anything else that's good, but maybe that internal insight that people are gaining, although not everybody makes it, and it's a sad situation indeed. But there does seem to be a little spiritual evolution, a little tick in the right direction. The thing on the news this morning, the Gillibrand Act, going through eventually the bill that will be passed. That's a step in the right direction. So again, thank you very much for what you've done to help that along, and all those who have.
Beautiful. Let me encourage people to contribute, and because the way I always sum it up is, to me, it's like a game. And if you remember, it was rumored that David Bohm had said, when you figure out the whole quantum physics thing, there's just another level below that. So we're never going to figure out anything, but we got to remember always that you and I and Dave and Bob and I, we're playing in the Super Bowl of all stories. If you understand what's actually going on and the implications of the fact that this talks about how does reality work, we are in the Super Bowl of all stories. We are not outside the stadium. We are not in the stands. We are on the field playing. What more could you ask for? As I always said, you could be an untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and spend your day in the junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. We didn't get that. We got to play in the biggest game of all times. If you understand, I've maintained it for years. If you understand the UFO, the consciousness thing, this is the biggest story of all times. There is nothing bigger. It will explain basically why we're here, what the heck's going on. And so I encourage people to help play the game with us and get on the field.
Beautifully said. I wish we had a pill that can do just that, but you're so right. I commend you for that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, gentlemen. Maybe we can do it again down the road, because most of my audience has dropped since I did the Tom DeLonge thing years ago. But majority of the people that watch are into consciousness. My audience is big time into this, so let's see where it goes.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful topic, and it should get more exposure, and people should begin talking about it more. I mean, I'd like to hear from people from your audience as well, and future guests that you have on your show, because I don't think that we have the answers, and I think we're open-minded. So
beautiful. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Grant. Where are you right now? Are you on a pontoon? But where are you? No, are you in Florida? That's a background.
No.
Oh, this is green screen.
You're up in Canada.
I live in the biggest, the coldest major city in the world. I came here so I couldn't do anything else except for UFOs. They stuck me.
Where are you?
I'm in Winnipeg.
Where are you?
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
How are the Jets playing?
Jets are struggling like everybody else. Actually, because of the COVID thing, they've sort of shut a lot of the games down. They may even shut the league down. So, but that's the thing, is it's a city where there's not much goes on. We just have a professional hockey team. But I think that's why I was stuck here. It's I have nothing else to do. I have no life except for UFOs. That's all I do. UFOs and consciousness. Actually, it's consciousness. I don't spend much time doing UFOs anymore. It's all basically in this field about what's actually going on. Why am I here? Why did I have the experience in 1975? Where am I going? And that's basically what it comes down to. Where are we from? Where are we going? Most people only when somebody says you got 3 months to live, then they go, oh my God, what's going on here? And then they try to figure it out. We spend our entire lives trying to figure out where did we come from and where are we going? And we are on the track. This will lead to some of the answers as to what the answer to those mysteries is.
Yeah.
One other thing, if I may add, before we all run, you mentioned free, and it's great to talk about that. It's important for obvious reasons, but I'm not really aligned with Ray anymore. I just went on free to do the article. The article was published, and I split. I respect him for a lot of reasons. I have my issues.
It still is important research. I mean, you mentioned the thing about near-death experiences, and I mean, I quote it every time. the free experience showed that of all experiencers, 37% had near-death experiences. The average is 5%. Do you think this is happening by accident, or do you think that people came into the world and said, I think I'll be an experiencer, and I think I'll have a near-death experience because I want to do this, whatever? We always want to play the victim, that we're here by accident and we got the bad deal, and Hillary Clinton's picking on us or whatever. But those kind of stats in the free survey, 54% of all people were talked to about oneness and love. Those are the kind of stats that I show people and say, you think it's just aliens abducting people for sperm or whatever. I don't think it has anything to do with that. When you start looking at the free thing, or what you talked about with the thing where the number one being that is seeing is the energy being. Reptilians weren't reported before 1988, but Greys, I maintain, were not reported before 1961. And it goes back to what John Mack said at the end of his life. He said, perhaps the being you see, and he said this to Bud, he said, Bud, isn't it strange how you're getting all the bad ones and I'm the psychologist and I'm getting all the good ones? Maybe Bud has more to do with you and I than it does with the beings. And he came up with the idea at the end of his life that the being that you see may be according to your mentality. So if you're in fear, you're going to see a gray. If you're very religious, you're going to see an energy being, and that you are part of the
what I get, Grant? Well, we should have saved this for the show. You're right on. You know what I often hear? The meaning you apply to it is what you receive.
Yeah.
It's simple like that. It's something like karma. It's as simple as that.
Well,
you talk to Ray. When Ray had his experience, everything's yin yang, plus and minus, positive, negative.
Yeah.
Black, white. That's reality. He believes it. Why? He was told that.
It was Jeffrey Kripal in his book that he said that he thought that maybe it's like looking through a two-way mirror. So you're actually seeing something, but you're getting a reflection back of something you're perceiving, and that's why the different people perceive these different beings like that.
Yeah, and because I've got talking to experiencers, I've got a number of experiencers where they saw three different beings. The one, I helped her publish 2 books. When she first saw it as a reptilian, and the next time she saw it, it was a human being, and now it's an energy being. So it's 3 different beings. It's the same being that she's dealing with. Or Sherry Wild, who said to the being said he was from Andromeda, and this publisher said, can't be from Andromeda, he's a gray, he's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. So you go ask him. She goes and she says, Doc, what's the deal? Are you actually an alien? And he said, no, that would not best describe who I am. I'm an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. And that's the whole thing. When everybody asks the being, are you actually a being? They'll go, well, no, not really. And that's this reflective aspect that comes when you go to Skinwalker Ranch. You reflect, you get what you put out. What goes around comes around, what you sow, you reap. Or as Bashar says, what you put out comes back. That is the rule of the universe. And that's part of the thing that people are missing in this whole thing, is that we are part of it. We want to play the victim, but we are part of what we're seeing. We may be all of what we're seeing. It may be, as Deepak Chopra says, it may be that everything is an activity inside consciousness, nothing more.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I was just one thing that's true too. Remember this, like there were so many experiences with beings that were from they were Venusians, if you recall this from the 50s. But as soon as science got to the point where we sent probes to Venus, that all stopped immediately because they realized it was like this dead planet or whatever, and there wasn't cities there that were
Exactly. I brought that up. I said, like, the first ones in 1895, 1896, 1897, they were flying around in wooden ships with propellers and balloons. And the guys that came out said, we were from Mars. I said, and I do it in lectures. I say, anybody think that these guys flew across from Mars in these wooden ships through the vacuum of space? Do you actually think they were from Mars? No, they weren't from Mars. And it's almost like Barbara Streisand's stepson is an experiencer. And he said, when they talked to him, they said, when we come into your world, we go into your head and we see what's in your head. And if you're in fear, we will use fear to teach you a lesson. We will go into your head and use what's in your mind. There's nothing else we can do. So we build the lesson based upon your belief systems and what you believe and what you fear and stuff like that. And that's Barbara Streisand's stepson said that.
Wow. Interesting.
It is, isn't it?
And that's why I think it's so important to listen to the experiencers, because they tell you these stories where, I've had a lot of them. Ask them, or I had I've had 3 experiences now where the beings actually came to me and they wanted me to do a book. I've done 3 books. I've got another one from
Right.
what are called beings in Great Britain. The first one I've seen where there's actually two people who are actually in contact with the being, and they're both like two channelers. So I usually get one channeler who's getting it, but this is two women who are both. And so they said the beings want to talk to you. So I went, and these beings, they said, you know, they don't have faces or anything like that. So I said, are you actually extraterrestrials? And they said, oh, if you want us to be extraterrestrials, we can be extraterrestrials if you want. We can take you to our planet. But no,
Uh-huh.
we've always been here. You're the visitor. I just about fell off my chair. And when you start talking into to this kind of intelligence, and you realize, and you start seeing that from more and more people now, even Yolando says that they may be actually from here. And that goes to the idea there's no time, there's no space, there's no out there, out
That's what I
there. It's
think.
all
I
here, it's
think.
all
I
now.
think.
And
Yes, I
that's how they can
think.
move around. They know how to
I
move around
think.
in the one thing.
I agree.
And
I
we make all
agree.
these assumptions that the world is flat, the sun goes around the earth, there's
Right.
stars out
No,
there.
no, no.
Well, I mean,
I
our perspective is within time. So if 1 second and 1 minute to us is a unit of time, outside of that, and 100 years could be a flash like that. So even though we if you think about, man, my life was a long time, I can remember all the stuff I did, and then suddenly you're dead, and you look back and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to live another 100 lives. But really, that piece of existence, that energy of experience outside of time seems a lot different than from the perspective of being within time, and a whole life seems like forever. And you think, wow, the investment of actually agreeing to live and experience all the things that you did in one whole life from the perspective of outside of life seems a lot different. It seems like, okay, now that I see that, I realize that that wasn't so long, really. It's just it's something that exists for all time, and many lives, past, present, future, all exist, concurrently.
Yeah, or you get the thing with the near-death experience, which I think is some of the most important research that I'll maintain from what I've done, and I've done a lot of research on all these different aspects
Yeah.
now, is that when you die, you're suddenly going to go, oh my God, it was a play. And it's like, then you go off and do something else. Or as Whitley Strieber's wife said, Whitley Strieber's wife, Anne, came back to him and said, Whitley, I am no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you. And so a lot of us are going to get Academy
Yeah.
Awards when you go to the other side is, oh, Dave, you actually believed, you were actually Dave. You actually believed that, man. You get the Academy Award.
That's right.
And it comes down to, you got to remember who you actually are. We are not the actor on the stage. We are playing an actor on the stage. And I think that the experiencers and all this, that's what it's telling us, is that when you walk off the stage, you're going to go and do another play. And near-death experience people will tell you that
they know
is
this.
you are not
Yeah.
the actor on the stage.
Trent,
Right.
if I know this, you know this. David's learning. He's learning. He's coming up. That he has to make his mind up. But he's a newbie. Well, to us, I am too a newbie. Believe me, I am. But Dave may not be. I don't know. But actually, Dave, no. Point is, he's learning a lot of this. The thing is, the thing is, I'm struggling with this all the time, and the people do know this. And that's why this bill doesn't mean very much. How are they going to share just what you said with the public? If you know it, Dave knows it, I know it. Don't you think they know it?
Yeah.
And they do. But who does? Who some names I know, but there's more. Who knows? I don't know if Biden does. He probably doesn't. But I don't know. You don't know. I know you discussed that. That's not for me to mention. But when people ask me, I say, listen to Grant. What the hell do I know? It's just an educated guess at best. The point is, that's the issue. And they're not going to share that. That's disclosure. This is I don't know, the smallest D you could find, but it's something. I'll take it. All right, you will too. Come on, you worked hard for it. Congratulations.
Even the idea, if they understand, because we've got a book coming out on apports and manifestations, where I look at a 1974 DIA document where they talk about apports, making like the whole Skinwalker Ranch. How did they put the 4 bulls inside the trailer without unlocking the door and putting them in there? And the DIA actually had a paper from 1974. I'll actually send you guys a copy of it. It is amazing when you see what they were working on. And they knew about ports. They knew about all this kind of stuff. And they said, maybe we can actually go into a foreign country and take the documents out and bring them back and look at the documents and then put them back without them even knowing. That's a port to manifestations. It happens around UFO experiences, happens around ghost experiences, stuff moving around the room, stuff disappearing and reappearing. The DIA has been working on this, but the problem is that they're working on it for weapons. So they're not going to tell you that. They're not going to tell you that the UFOs are saying, get rid of the nuclear weapons, which the Canadians were told right in the word go. The Canadian director was told by the aliens in 1951 to get rid of the nuclear weapons, and you're not going to be allowed to use them. Other than that, we're going to allow the human race to stew in its own juices, which means it doesn't matter if you destroy yourselves, but you're not going to destroy the world. You're not going to contaminate the world. So these kind of things, there's no way they're going to tell you that the message, they've got to have the message that the nuclear missiles, they want the nuclear missiles. They're not going to release that. So they're playing this game because, it's going to be destabilizing. It's going to be, this kind of stuff. So they may know a little bit, but again, they probably don't know the real aspect of it. They're trying to figure it out, but they're trying to figure it out for weapons. They're trying to figure out how do we do it. And that's why Aesop, I said, went to Skinwalker Ranch. It didn't go for UFOs. It went because the woman brought in a bunch of groceries into the kitchen. She put all the groceries away and went into another room, came back, and all the groceries are back in the bag. And you're an intelligence guy and you go, my God, would we love to be able to do that? I mean, go into, make Putin's stuff disappear and stuff like that. That's what they're looking. So I agree. They're not going to release that kind of stuff because they're looking at it for their own interest. But you and I have the interest of the world in terms of what does this really mean? What is the message? We got to get the message that the intelligence is trying to give to the world. They are working through us, I believe. That's why they're doing the weird thing. Why do UFOs have lights on them? They have lights on them so you can see them. They want you to see them. This is all a play. This is all them getting your attention, doing weird stuff to get your attention, to drag you down the rabbit hole so people start working. And it's almost like any other social political movement, whether it be gay rights or African American. We may think we're losing. They're making bad jokes about us or whatever. But in the end, as the consciousness rises and people talk about it, everybody's going to suddenly go, oh, I know what's going on. That's what happened in the New York Times article. When the New York Times article came out, Stephen Greer and even I believe that the stock market meltdown when they actually said, yeah, UFOs are real, because everybody'd say, oh, you don't need oil anymore. What happened when the New York Times article came out? Everybody went, yeah, I knew that already. Tell me the next thing. And we're moving up. The consciousness is rising. I don't care what anybody says. It's rising at a very.
It's rising. Look. Let me leave you with this. I was on an lanai a few weeks ago. I'm looking up in the sky, 3 stars. So I said, I want to memorize the stars that I'm looking at. I just thought came to me. I want to learn when I look at these. I know them. So I get up my little, app. Deneb. It's going to the north. Altair, Vega. Deneb, Altair, look it up, Vega. And this is the first time I ever said that.
Yeah. D,
in that order. A, V, Dave, Beatty, Bob, Davis. I mean, Dave, I know coincidence, I won the lottery, I know all that kind of shit, but of all the letters, of all the stars, coincidence, okay. But, I know we all get a million of them. But it's just that, even being aware of it, the timing meaning thing. Like Linda Noyes had one she shared on Space Hot Radio today. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable.
We're living in Disneyland, but at least we're not like people who are totally sort of have no clue what's going on at all, who are just basically, taking their kids to soccer practice and doing their stuff. And they're at their level, but that's why I say we have to respect the fact, like the Bible says, too much is given, much is expected. Edgar Casey said, knowledge not used is sin. So the three of us are in a worse position because if it comes down to the end of life and they say, oh, that guy didn't know any better, you and I knew better. We knew the importance of this issue, and it's up to us to move it because to whom much is given, much is expected.
Why? Why don't you just leave me alone?
Because you agreed to it.
But you're in a position to elevate others. If a few people listen to us. I get it. 26 million plus have seen him. You turn some heads. You woke some people up. We're gonna, that's the whole point, in part.
How much do you think this is related to technology, like the next evolution of free energy system? propulsion systems and so on. I mean, you know, if you look at every paradigm in technology, there's always been this like shift. It's almost like this was given to somebody, you know, this idea. And maybe we're at this cusp of this next iteration of technology, but it's also so dangerous because it's has so much potential for being used, you know, as a weapon system as well. So
I've done a lot of writing on, I asked Jacques Vallée about this. I did a lot of writing about the whole thing about the crash flying saucers. I was the one that released the Wilson document. The Wilson document, it says, we think we have a craft that we can fly, which means that they got a craft that they can't fly. It's totally intact. They can't fly it because you need a consciousness interface to fly it. And so I look at the metal material. I said, isn't it strange? I said to Jacques, this doesn't make any sense. I said they go across the time and space. They dodge galaxies and black holes, and they get all the way here. And then they're going at 8 miles an hour in 1895, in 1897 in
balloons and wooden ships,
and they hit a windmill at 8 miles an hour, and they think they crash. And I said, and then there's little pieces falling down. And I said, Jacques, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, how do little pieces falling off a flying saucer after it's flown across the galaxy? I said, this looks more like they're gifting this stuff, that they're dropping it, because that's what Bigelow said. Bigelow said, I think they're seeding these things around the planet. And then
it's like a carrot on a stick, you know.
Gary told me the other day it's like leaving breadcrumbs.
Exactly.
Breadcrumbs.
And Gary was at the field with Tyler D, and it was my friend that showed Tyler D where the field was in New Mexico. And Diane Pasulka talks about this. She said when he took Gary and I to the field with the blindfolded and they started the stuff, the first thing Tyler did is start to pray. And they opened up the fence that had a lock on it and went inside, and he made an altar. And he said, there's all these altars all over the place. That would indicate someone knows something. And this whole idea that it's much more spiritual than people think it is. And so I asked Jacques, I said, Jacques, this looks like it's gifting. He said, I think I'm the one that came up with that idea. So they know this idea that we're being helped, that we're being guided, because otherwise, why are all these pieces? Or the latest one that I've got a YouTube coming out in a couple of days on this, where Nolan talks about the two pieces of metal, you know, the ones with the Ubatuba from Brazil. And he said, look at these two pieces of metal. They're from the same crash. And one has the isotopes all messed up, and the other one, the isotopes are normal. And they're trying to figure out, oh, did they stir the ice cream? What's going on? And it's like, no, it's theory of wow. They want you to go, what the hell's going on? Why is the one piece messed up and why is the other? That's why they're dropping the stuff. All the pieces are different. They're all these weird things, and they're dragging you down the rabbit hole, the same as they give you.
Yeah, it's a Roswell, this 2021 version of Roswell. Yeah.
And so we've all been, maybe we even agreed that we'd come in and you drop me this piece of metal. I'm going to find a piece of metal. I'm going to do this. And it's all less random than I think it is. Because when you look at the UFO phenomena, you see all the stuff, and it's all this theory of wow is everything. You go, wow, what is going on? What are they doing? And they're making it weird, because if they don't make it weird, you're not going to pay attention. That's why everything is so weird and so dramatic. And when it happens to you, it's like near-death experience people. The 75 to 80% of people who are near-death experiences get divorced because their life is flipped upside down. Their partner says, you're absolutely crazy. Stop talking about this. And even Ray's wife was ready to divorce him. It's this idea as you go down the rabbit hole with this weird stuff, and it's you agree to do it, but we are the messiahs. We become consumed by it. We can't let it go, and we're doing our job, but we don't realize that we may have agreed to this whole thing.
I know, you're exactly right. We're certainly, and that's consciousness, the piece of it, or part of it.
I gotta go, guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mention the documentary one more time. When do you expect it to be out?
Well, right now we're in pre-production, and we have several interviews in the can. We don't have an air date at this time. I mean, when I talked to Bob, I was like, look, because we don't have funding for the film, we can't go out and make it right now. So we're doing it, bootlancing it, and doing it for free. The funds that we're seeking really are to cover production costs. The biggest one is a lot of these people are around the country. So to actually do high level production, we have to go there and film them versus doing it via Zoom to actually do a production like that. So we're trying to do it step by step. And at this point, we don't have an air date.
And where do they contact you? Have you got a website or an email where they can contact you if they're interested?
Yeah, the easiest place to go where it has all the information is consciousnessfilm.info. Consciousness, the word film, like film.info is the website. And there you'll find email portal. You'll find links to a screener that we did, a teaser film that kind of sets up the topics. You'll see the participants that have agreed to be interviewed in the film. You can reach out and contact us. There's an email list as well.
If you send me the link to the or the access to the teaser, I'll put the teaser on the front so we can put it. I'll put all the
Awesome.
links in the stuff for people, and hopefully people will join on because they may have agreed to do this, and this is part of what it's about to be alive, is to contribute to the world. So I appreciate the work you guys are doing. Anything I can do to help you, I'm here.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a
Grant.
lot.
Beautiful.
Appreciate your support.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you for
gentlemen.
all
We'll
you
talk to you
do.
later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.